Whether you're a self-taught musician, have a teacher, or you're already a professional, this show is meant to help you with knowledge, mindset, craft, and strategies to improve your overall musicianship so that you can become the best musician you can be, regardless of your goals. Welcome to Musicianship Mastery. Hello and welcome to Musicianship Mastery, episode number 114. My name is David Lane, and it is great to be with you once again. I hope all of you are doing well. We are getting into the spring, and it's warm here, and I'm enjoying it, and I hope that you are having a productive year. We're getting close to that halfway point. Now, I'll be a little bit transparent here and just give you a peek behind the curtain. So I imagine that you're listening to this at some point in May, probably mid to late May. And I'm recording this actually in the middle of April. I do this sometimes, especially for the solo episodes. I record the interviews with guests when I can, but the ones that are by myself, I try to do in batches and record them over the course of maybe a week. And then I don't record anything for several weeks, and then I come back to it. And this is part of a batching process, which is a topic I've talked about before, and I might want to come back to that again. I really think it's a great way to get things done. But I sometimes have to imagine the conditions going ahead. But I wanted to tell you when I'm recording it, because I am in an accountability group that is all about quarterly goals. It's about setting and staying on top of and eventually meeting your quarterly goals. The leader of this accountability group is kind of an advocate for not starting off with January, but letting January be kind of a big time to get yourself organized without thinking about all of the holiday stuff that comes in December. So it's a way to just give yourself a nice transition into the year. So our quarter one starts in February and it ends in April. I'm actually in the last couple of weeks of quarter one. This is actually the last full week of quarter number one. And then the week that's remaining in April will all be about reflection. So again, I'm talking about quarterly goals today. It's been a while since I've talked about something on a solo episode that was not strictly about music or heavily about music. I am certainly going to incorporate musicianship and music in this episode. But I wanted to revisit this topic of quarterly goals. I talked about this on episode number 27, which was called The Power of Quarterly Goals. And I want to review why I am such a fan of quarterly goals and why so many other successful people also are a fan of quarterly goals. Why I think it's really the biggest way to organize your goals and to achieve success. So there's a bit of a Goldilocks thing when it comes to quarterly goals. First of all, it's not as big as a year. So it allows you a more manageable amount of time to set a goal or set of goals and to stick with it through a time. And it's hard to stick with things for a year if that's your measurement. But if you're only measuring by the quarter, if you're just measuring for 12 weeks, you can get it done. Now, again, if you're being picky, 3 months out of the year is always 13 weeks. We use that 13th week for a time of reflection and to transition to the next goals. So you actually give yourself, at least in terms of like the things you want to get done, you give yourself that time off. So you set your goals for 12 weeks and not 13 weeks. But it's something that you can have consistent success with and stick with. But it's also bigger than a day, and it's bigger than a week, and it's even bigger than a month. So it gives you a chance to actually not just think small, but to think big enough that your project can have maybe multiple components, that it's something that you're going to have to build one layer on another layer. And if it's a project that's going to actually take more than a quarter, well, you can cut that into a segment, something that you can build on in a quarter. And then you divide that by 12, like what do you need to accomplish each week? Or you divide it by 3, what do you need to accomplish each month? So again, it's not so big that you can't do it, that you're going to lose interest because it takes a year. It's not so small of a goal that you're going to get it done in just a day, week, or a month. Now, another thing that works for me personally is that a quarter can have its own theme of what you're trying to accomplish. Now, I should also say that your quarterly goals don't have to include everything you're doing in your life. Like, I don't include for my quarterly goals things like teaching my students or even doing lesson planning. It's like I might have a quarterly goal around something that's maybe unusual, or that maybe I'm going to work on my website, the section that deals with my teaching and for my students and so forth. So I might have some goals like that. But you don't have to include everything. You don't have to include your habits as well. Those are kind of separate. But a quarter can have its own theme. So for example, my quarter one goal, February through April, was about systems and lists. And what I was doing was I took some major projects, some categories of things that I'm going to have to be doing throughout the year. And I just took time to write down what is everything I need to do. So, for example, I'm the composition and theory coordinator for the North Carolina Music Teachers Association. And by extension, I'm the coordinator for the state branch of the MTNA National Composition Competition. And so I have 2 events I have to oversee. I have a lot of communication that goes into that. And of course, there's a recital that is as a result of one of those competitions. And I just took time to write down every single thing that I need to do, even down to I need to email the teachers 2 weeks before registration opens, and put a date on that. So all of these things are calendar events. I also did that for all of the planning I have to do with the church where I'm a music director all the way through September and into October. And of course, one of the calendar events is plan the rest of this year, and there'll be some point in the summer where I do that. But I also worked on just some automations, some templates, some things that can help me do things faster and just kind of getting my systems organized. So that was the theme for quarter number 1. The theme for quarter number 2 is production. So all of my goals are going to involve spending a certain number of hours creating original music. I have goals for a certain number of podcast episodes, for a certain number of YouTube videos. And that's the main focus. It's create, produce, and I don't know what quarter 3 will be. Let's have a successful quarter 2 first, and then see where we are from there. Okay, so I talked about this before in more detail on episode number 27, The Power of Quarterly Goals. But that was a while ago. In fact, that was just under 2 years ago that I did that episode. So today, I want to talk about what I got wrong about quarterly goals 2 years ago and what I've learned since then that I think makes them a little bit more effective. And again, credit to my accountability group. I do recommend, if you don't have a teacher, having accountability partners is really a big deal. It's hard to do anything successful being by yourself. So on these solo episodes, I often like to give lists, and sometimes they can be kind of big, 6, 7, or 8 things. I'm going to give you 3 things, just 3 things that I got wrong about quarterly goals. But it's big enough that I thought that I should mention it. So the first thing that I got wrong with my quarterly goals was that I had too many goals. It's easy to get excited. You can think about all the things that you want to do, and you just feel like you want to get them all done as soon as possible. So you add one goal here and then another goal there. So again, this is coming from within my accountability group, and it is recommended that you limit yourself to 3 goals. However, I have a hard time with that. So we've kind of established that 6 is kind of the max, as long as some of those 6 are not like overly demanding. I mean, one of my 6 goals is related to fitness. There is a series of workouts. It has 42 workouts, and you can choose 15, 30, or 45 minutes. And I want to do 30-minute workouts, complete all 42 within a quarter. And that is something, if I did 3 a week, it would be done in 7 weeks. So I have a lot of leeway. That's not going to take a lot of it. It takes no planning at all. It takes 30 minutes of my time and effort. So I don't mind. That's not a goal that is going to exhaust me very much. But I also have a goal in addition to doing a podcast episode every week. I want to produce and release 6 new videos just for YouTube that are tutorials. And that will take some effort. That will take some time. I couldn't handle too many goals like that. So if you're just getting into this, calm your excitement a little bit and try to get as close to 3 goals as you can. So now, 3, you don't have to do any less than that. Go ahead and go for 3 goals that you want to accomplish in the quarter, but really try to limit it to that. And if you just can't, absolutely no more than 6. This is someone who was really trying to do 9 and 10 goals my first few quarters. My percentage rate of success was not too high. That's a lot to try to keep up with. The second thing that I got wrong was not having clearly defined tactics. Now, goals are what you want to achieve in a certain amount of time, in 3 months. Tactics are what are you going to do to get there. So how does your goal divide by 12? How much time can you devote to your goal? So you have to figure out what can you spend on it. What does that look like when you multiply that times 12 weeks? And what do you end up accomplishing if you do that? So you want to make sure you don't have a goal that's not aligning with the time you can invest or the time that you have to go to it. So you want to try to get that something that you can measurable. But I'm going to give some examples of specific goals when it comes to music, or I'm going to give an example in just a moment. But you need to know, what are you going to be doing on week 1? What are you going to be doing on week 2? And so forth. And the third thing that I got wrong about quarterly goals before was that they were not measurable enough. Your goals need to have something about it that you can measure, or it's not a clearly defined goal and you're not going to be able to have clearly defined tactics. So I'm in a group with a lot of teachers, and a really bad goal for them would be, I want to get more students, or I want to make more income. And that's a goal you can't really measure. What does that even mean? One more student, get $1 more? What does that even mean? So you have to change that to something like, I want to sign up 3 new students. So that's 1 a month. I want to sign up 6 new students. That's 2 a month. And the rest of your goal is, I will do that by doing this. So that could be advertising with homeschool groups, or posting on your next door group, or doing a social media post every single day on TikTok or Instagram or wherever it is at the time. So you have your goal that's measurable, has a number attached to it, and here's the tactics by how you're going to try to get that goal. And then you will know if you succeeded in 12 months by what you accomplished versus what you set out to do. And if you don't meet it, you evaluate during that 13th week, you evaluate your tactics and try to figure out what seemed to be helpful and what's not. And then you could decide whether or not to renew that for another quarter with kind of insight that you've gained from the previous quarter. One thing that I mentioned in a previous episode is this concept of KPI. And this is something, as far as I know, this is probably thanks to Google came up with this. It's KPI, and I'm talking about the company, not the search engine. but it may have been around before then, but I think it's been popularized by Google, and it's called key performance indicators. So when you look at what matters, what worked well and what didn't, not everything is of equal importance. This is something that has really transformed professional sports over the last couple of decades. Things like in baseball, it was believed for the longest time that if you were a hitter, you really wanted to get a high batting average. And some smart people analyzed the game, and they said that when it came to teams actually winning games, batting average was not a KPI. It was not a key performance indicator, and it had very little impact on how well someone did. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that sometimes if a hitter was really good, they ended up walking a lot, which doesn't count as even an at-bat. It didn't even count as one of those. So you had that, and you also had some hitters who, if they came up on to bat with 2 or 3 guys on base already and they hit a home run, they would score 3 or 4 runs at a time. And they might strike out the rest of the time. So that was something else. They thought strikeouts were bad, and they determined that no, actually batting average isn't that great, and number of strikeouts also isn't that great of a KPI, but on base percentage is, and what they call OPS, which is kind of a way of dividing like the number total of bases you get by the number of at-bats you get. So when you're looking at what you want to accomplish, you need to know what is the key performance indicator. For me, it might be the number of hours that I log on a project, because I can't really control how much I'm going to produce. So for example, that's my composition goal. I have a certain number of hours that I want to log in the quarter, in quarter number 2. And it's something that I can easily divide by 12. I'm actually dividing by 11 because I am going to have a vacation in there. So this quarter is more of an 11-week quarter for me. And I'll have a vacation week and a reflection week. Again, if I said that I wanted to compose a certain number of pieces, well, I don't know if I can invest the time to do that for this particular goal. This is music for myself. It's not music that I'm doing on a deadline where I would have to make the time. It's music I want to compose, and I want to log a certain number of hours devoted to that. And I'll just share, for composing original music, I want to log 33 hours. So that's 3 hours a week. Now I'll figure out how that divides up. If I'll do that 6 days a week, 30 minutes a day, or if I'll do that 3 days a week, 1 hour a day. I'm not quite there yet. I'll certainly have been doing that by the time this episode is released. So you need to figure out, what are your KPIs? What are the things that you can measure that make a difference? And again, for my goal, if I only get 30 hours in, I need to look at why I couldn't get 3 more. Or if I actually get to 33 quite easily and I want a lot more time to that, that's an adjustment that I can make. So measure the things that matter and ignore the things that don't. That's your KPI. So those are the things that I got wrong in episode 27 about quarterly goals, or the things that I just failed to think of as being important. Now, I want to bring this to some musical goals that you might have, and I want to just talk about, first of all, a vague versus a specific goal. So a vague goal that you might have is, I'm going to learn this sonata, or I'm going to work on this sonata. Well, what would be more specific than that? It would be, I'm going to learn the first 2 movements of this sonata at performance tempo. So there's something measurable. You have a number of movements you're going to work on. You can see how many measures those are, and you can actually use the metronome or see what the metronome mark is and come up with a goal tempo for each of them, and then just figure out, okay, what kind of practice time is that going to require in terms of number of measures per week, number of measures per day? How are you handling the tempo? How much time do you need to get it up to tempo after you've learned it at a slow tempo? So you have some things that you can measure, and that brings to KPIs. So the KPIs for this goal would be, what is the tempo using a metronome? If memorization is part of the process, can you memorize it? Also, is there a specific number of mock recordings or performances that you could do of this piece? Because again, if you have it performance ready at a performance tempo, can you demonstrate that through a performance? So maybe you say, I actually want to show that I can do 5 of these. So you record yourself playing it. And maybe you have an accountability. You share it with somebody. Maybe you don't have to do it online, but you share it with somebody. Like, here's my performance of this piece that I've been working on for these 3 months. Another example of a vague goal that has no KPI, nothing measurable at all, would be compose. I'm going to compose more. I'm going to write more music. That's very vague and also not very inspiring, because one measure and you're done. You've composed. So how about something specific? How about for a quarter you say, I'm going to compose 600 new measures. And if you divide that by 12, that's 50 measures a week. Now, I'm not saying that's a good goal or a great goal or whatever. You choose for what you can spend the time doing, what seems to suit you. But I can tell you that 600 measures is probably about the length of a full 3-movement sonata. That's a pretty good accomplishment if it's not something that you're doing as the main thing you do, if it's not your full-time job. So you have that, and it's very easy to measure, because let's say that you have a week where you only get 40 measures in. Well, you know you're at a deficit of 10. You need to try to get 60 at some point to catch up. So you can measure it as you go and see how you're doing. Well, that's it. That's more about the power of quarterly goals. I hope that you're doing those. It really makes a difference. And if you have any questions or anything you'd like to share, again, there's 2 ways you can do that. You can go to speakpipe.com/musician toolkit, or go to my website and use the contact form on the homepage. That's at davidlanemusic.com. Thank you for listening or watching this episode. If you're on YouTube, please hit subscribe if you haven't already, and click the thumbs up on the video. And if you have a comment you'd like to leave, feel free to do that. I always love reading any feedback that you have on any of these episodes. If you're on a podcast app such as Apple or Spotify and you haven't left a 5-star rating and review, it's very helpful and encouraging if you're willing to do that. So again, that's going to wrap up today's episode. Thank you once again so much for listening, and I'll be back with you again next week.